Hi all, it's Chris Weber and Anthony Claypool with you again. We're going to be talking about how you plan for a block of instruction. So I'm on my Google search homepage. I've logged into my Distinctive Schools account, and to get to the DS Math for the Common Core website, I go to Sites, I click on iTeacher, and here I am. Let's go to 3rd grade, Block 1 again, as we have done in other videos. Now here's the wonderful, incredible, transformative thing about the Common Core and about Distinctive Schools Math for the Common Core, if we do things right. And the transformative things is we have a lot of time and there aren't necessarily a lot of standards, which should get us to lots of students mastering to a high level of depth and complexity. So for example, in 3rd grade Block 1 we have 29 instructional days and there are 3 Common Core standards. This is great news. So that's the awesome opportunity we have. The challenge is, how do we plan? How do we utilize those 29 days optimally? Well, we have some resources for you. As we scroll down and look on the left-hand side, the left-hand sidebar, there's a document called Cognitive Block Planning. So let's click on that document and go through it. So as you can see here, it gives us some steps that we should use, and listen, this is important, before the block begins, in order to optimally utilize the instructional days that we have. So before school starts for Block 1, we'll move on to have done these things. And here's the things we should have done. First, we should review the Common Core standards, the substandards, the skills, and you guys, the IXL anchor problems, because those are really going to give us an idea about what it actually means to demonstrate mastery of standard. The other thing that we must do when we're planning the block is look at the block's CFA. That's before we start teaching, because we want to know where our target is. What are the types of problems that kids should be able to do by the end of the block, and in what format, with what type of thinking. Okay, the next step is to get out your plan book or a calendar, or whether you do this electronically or otherwise, and block out the number of instructional days for that particular block, noting that the CFA should be given at on the last day of the block. And then, you guys, we're going to use our professional judgment, okay? And that's what this step 4 takes us through. So based on your knowledge of students' needs and on the number of days likely to be required for different skills and standards, plan out the number of days that you think you should be allocated with a couple of things in mind. For example, don't simply allocate 1 day per skill or per standard. Okay? Not all standards are created equally. Also, allow the maximum amount of time that you can for standards that are going to require more time, more days, etc. Build in time for instruction on prerequisites if you think that's going to be necessary. Build in time to do conceptually based, manipulatively based, hands-on lessons. Build that time in. Build in time for problem solving, project-based or inquiry-based lessons. And build in time for a couple of things that we're going to see on a sample here in a moment. For example, build in time to give a pre-test. Yeah, at the very beginning of the block. Build in time for some reteach within the block if you have that time and you think you can utilize it. And then the last thing is that I really recommend that we collectively, collaboratively, prioritize what's most critical for kiddos to know within a block. So I'll talk you through that a bit as when we go back to the map itself for 3rd grade Block 1, but I wanted to talk through this document with you. And I also want to show you another document that will help you identify the most essential skills. Okay? If you go down, there is a document called Vertical Common Core State Standards K8. So let's click on that. This is going to show us a document that lists all of the standards, y'all, from kindergarten through 8th grade in the order in which they appear on the map. So if we scroll down, as I'm doing now, you can see in gray, those are the overarching standards. In dark gray, those are the anchor standards. And then just in plain old yellow, those are just the numbered standards themselves. But what I hope that you're seeing, and I'm showing you here throughout this vertical standard document, is that some of the overarching standards are in bold. Why? Because the Common Core standard people, the experts, have said that these are the essential standards. What does that mean? That means they're going to be more heavily represented on the test. That's what that means. And it also means that these are the overarching standards that folks at the Common Core Standard Institute, if that's what it's called, have determined to be the most critical for success in high school. So these are the most critical K-8 standards within each grade level. So that's something else that we can access and utilize. Now this document that I've just showed you might also be beneficial when you're vertically planning with your colleagues, when you're trying to determine what some prerequisite skills may be, when you're trying to determine what some extension skills may be. So if I'm a third grade teacher, kindergarten, first, second, third, I can look to my left to see second grade standards that are related, and I can look to my right to see fourth grade standards are related. All right, y'all, let's go back to the map and determine how we might actually plan for an entire block. So I look at my common formative assessment after I look at some of my standards. So I have standards here about place value, rounding to the nearest 10, rounding to the nearest 100. Scrolling down, I see standards about adding and subtracting within 1,000. So kids need to know their addition and subtraction facts, but they also need to fluently add with regrouping. And as I keep scrolling down to this last standard, they're going to need to be able to multiply one-digit whole numbers by multiples of 10. So those are the types of standards, the type of tasks that kids are going to need to be able to do. To further my knowledge of what that could look like, I could go to IXL. Now, in a previous video, we showed you an IXL problem from MBT1 in third grade. What about from NBT2 in third grade? Addition of multi-digit. Or how about addition word problems? So it directs us to IXL, and yes, here's an example of the type of problem a kiddo should be able to solve. We can use these to inform our knowledge of the standards, but we can also use these in the classroom with kids during much of our lessons. So IXL is going to be a big benefit for us, and we'll talk more about how we can use IXL in subsequent videos. The other thing that should really inform our knowledge of what we need kiddos to learn within a given block is the common formative assessment. And so here's the link to the CFA. And so we can start to see the types of problems, the depth and the complexity of problems that kids are going to need to be able to solve. Let me just give you one example. The very first problem. There were 3,409 pieces of candy in a jar. If 145 pieces were red and the rest were blue, how many were blue? So clearly this is a subtraction problem. Multi-digit with some regrouping requirements and even subtracting across zeros if you look carefully. But I also want to point out to you that the kids are going to need to be able to explain their answer using a picture, drawing, model, or diagram, or any way, right, that they can explain their thinking. This is critical to the Common Core, critical to the depth of knowledge we want our kids to have. So review those two items so that you can kind of start to plan out how this might look. There are other resources that we've previously discussed in our video about DS Math Basics, the basics of the website, so I won't go into those, but what I do want to show you is on the left-hand side there is a sample block pacing that Melissa Feinberg and Susan Thomas did for second grade block 1. Thanks to the two of them. They're part of our awesome math crew. And here's what they did. They just have a calendar, a Monday through Friday calendar, starting August 20th and concluding 29 instructional days later at the end of September with the CFA. Okay, but let's look at how they chose to utilize their days. Now please, huge disclaimer here folks. This is one way of doing things, okay? It doesn't have to be the only way of doing things. What's the non-negotiable with DS Math or with a DS Math block when we are planning for that block? The non-negotiable is that kids master with depth and complexity the standards represented in that block by the end of the block on the CFA. Okay, how we do that, that's the magic, that's the art and the science of teaching. But the non-negotiable, kind of the target, is that we want our kids to demonstrate mastery. So let's go back and see how Susan and Melissa used the days. Well, first they were acknowledging that for the first couple of days of school they probably won't be doing math. That makes sense. But here on the first Friday of the school year, they're going to give a pre-assessment. Now, what they're going to use at the beginning of this block is the same CFA that they're going to give at the end of the block. Kids are not going to remember or memorize this CFA. You're not going to let them keep it, but it will be a great assessment and time well spent. You might think, wow, a whole day for that? Guys, if we do it, it's going to save us time later in the block because we're going to know a couple of things. We're going to know stuff that kids are already really familiar with, or concepts and skills that some kids are already familiar with. We're also going to immediately identify kids who need more support, and that's going to really benefit us. So I think it's time well spent, and Melissa and Susan have chosen to do that. As we will discuss many times, this is not a non-negotiable. Pre-assessment CFA is not a non-negotiable. We kind of would like you, it is a non-negotiable to give the end of the unit CFA, but not to use it in other ways. Moving on, you can see that they're spending some time early talking about what it means to prove work, which is a key for all of us. They're going to use base 10 blocks to create 2-digit numbers, which is part of that first standard, MBT1. Moving on, they're still working on MBT1. They're using blocks and pictures and other things to represent numbers. And that is still the case as they're reading and writing numbers into the second week. Moving into subsequent weeks, you can see that they're doing some skip counting and some comparisons. Now this is second grade, not the third grade math we've been looking at, so they're not going to get into any addition and subtraction at the beginning of the year in second grade. They're doing number sense concepts, reading and writing, place value, and comparison. But you can see that they've just listed out the types of skills, the type of activities that they're going to be working on with kiddos. Note too that right before the end of the block, they're going to give a form of the CFA. Now at this point, they're probably not going to give the entire CFA, and they're certainly not going to give the exact same CFA that they've given, that they're going to give in 3 days at the end of the unit, or that they gave at the beginning of the unit. Why give a version or a form of the CFA here before the end of the unit? Well, as you can see, it allows them time to do some reassessment before the end of block CFA, to do some reteaching, some differentiated supports. So really good idea to build that in. Obviously, we can anticipate, we can predict that some kids are going to need that help, so let's go ahead and plan for that in advance. So this is a sample of planning for the block. What are the big takeaways from block planning, the subject of this video? Well, what I do want to remind you of is that there is a document on the left-hand sidebar called Cognitive Block Planning, that there's also a sample from second grade block 1 that Melissa and Susan prepared for us that we've been looking at right now. But the biggest takeaway, you guys, is that we should do this collaboratively. So work with other teachers in your grade level. We're going to work with teachers in our grade level across the network. Work with teachers in adjoining grade levels. We have schools where there's only a single teacher per grade level. Well, you can still work with your colleagues from another grade level to help you think through the optimal use of the number of days that we have. Notice that there's not one lesson per day that they're teaching. There are multiple days for a given concept and different ways in which that concept is done. Again, the target, the only quote-unquote non-negotiable, is that we want kids to demonstrate mastery to a level of depth and complexity that we've probably never seen before by the end of this unit, when we give that end of unit CFA. As is always the case, Anthony and I, Chris, are available through Google, our Gmail, DS Gmail, for any questions you may have. And Chris will be on campus 2 full days a month to provide any supports that you may need.